Thank you. We've got, for the next hour, we're going to be talking about developing school culture. And then the hour after that, we're going to be talking about strategic roundtables again, with a slight twist on the roundtables this time around. This session is going to be somewhat interactive. It's going to require audience participation. And what we're going to do is that we're going to introduce culture as a notion and then talk about that. And talk about align everybody to what culture actually is, so we've got a common understanding about that. I'm going to create a context for you, and then we're going to have a great debate and have you debate one context against another to see which one you think you can argue for most strongly. And then our adjudicator, Mrs. Robin Collins, she doesn't know that yet, but she does now, is going to adjudicate your compelling argument for one aspect of culture versus another aspect. Okay, so that's where we're going. Now, I just wanted to, let's get on the same page with regards to culture, because it's a word that's just so often used out there in business, in education, in health, and in any of the professional areas or domains. We hear the word culture, but what really is it? What is it we're referring to when we say culture?
How we do things around here.
How we do things, yes. So, I like that. How we do things. Let's keep it simple. So then how do we express the things we do? How is that expressed? How do we realise it? How do we see it, experience it, feel it, sense it? In what? In what way? In our behaviours. Yeah, so that's the doing things is definitely in our behaviours. So how else would you think of a nice place like a restaurant that you go to? We've found a lovely little restaurant in Graceville at the moment we go to, and to us it has the perfect culture. Not necessarily the greatest food, but the food is still lovely. It's nice enough to go there, but it's just the ambience and the way that we're greeted, the way that we're handled, just the experience, the atmosphere. Yeah, it's just divine. You know, it's just something that we, again, in only 4 weeks we're going back for the 3rd time because it's just so nice. So there's things about it that's, you know, the behaviours that we see from the staff. It's an Italian restaurant, and so we're getting some almost authentic Italian behaviour, which is lovely. It's what we expect. What else would you say defines a culture? Say again?
Beliefs.
The beliefs. So the beliefs. How do we experience beliefs? Because the beliefs would actually change our behaviour, wouldn't they? So there's something that drives our behaviours. So let's talk about that, almost the output, because the belief's an input. That it will actually shape a behaviour. Jason?
I've got a bit of a saying that sometimes people's beliefs shape their behaviour, but all too often the behaviour they want to do shapes their beliefs.
It does, doesn't it? One can drive the other, particularly through repetition. So what about practices in the workplace? How well you actually, say, process? Let's keep the restaurant on the burner here for a moment. There's the behaviour, that's the greeting and what have you, but then there's also the efficiency of the restaurant, the actual practices. Does that define the culture?
Service.
The service? Yeah, so it's definitely. Yeah, so that's another aspect of it. What else would you say is contributing to a culture? Then let's think about the experience, what you're experiencing.
Culture also works out in the way of physical artifacts. So if you go into a restaurant and you would have a certain setting of tables, you would have a certain...
So there's a physicality aspect of it as well, isn't there?
And in a school you'd have academic gowns and
Yep.
uniforms.
It speaks volumes for what it is that the organisation itself actually stands for in that regard. So it's what we value or what we believe will be reflected in our physical environment. I know from my own experiences in the Air Force that when you walk into a maintenance area and you see that everything is pristine and clean and the tools are kept in the right place, there's no rubbish on the floors, that says something about that place. You can tell immediately what sort of pride the people have and what they value. A BMW workshop. Have anybody been inside a BMW workshop? They actually paint their floors white. It is pristine. You could eat your dinner off the floor, and it tells you what they stand for. Jason. What we spend money on. So how do we experience what we spend money on? How will we actually understand that or recognise that? So we recognise behaviours, practices, and the physical aspects. So money would drive the physical aspects of what you have, wouldn't it? Where your priorities are. So what you've invested in that regard. So that could be the physical aspects and it could be the human aspects. Yeah? So let's just delve a little bit more, because this culture is very much about the human element of.
It's got to be the attitudes, doesn't it?
So do the attitudes drive behaviours and practices? So what I'm trying to do is actually get you focused on the outputs of culture at the moment, because
Attitude's also an output, though. How people, like, let's go to the restaurant. How you greet at the restaurant is there's an attitudinal aspect to how you've been greeted,
correct.
which therefore shapes the culture of whether you want to come back or not.
It shapes my attitude towards the restaurant, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because if mama's not very happy and you get a terrible greeting, you're not going to come back.
So it's having this cyclic effect, isn't it? So one will drive the other. So let's talk about, rather than my response to it at the moment, so what it actually does to my behaviours and my practices, we'll talk about the actual output of the school itself. So think of me as a customer of your school, and I'm trying to actually put take a read on your school's culture. I'm reading the physical, human aspects, what you've got there. I'm reading the way you go about delivering education, the services. I'm also reading the behaviours. What else am I reading into? One of the number one issues that is always referred to in schools is around communication. How well we communicate things. Does that resonate with you? People are fairly critical of how schools communicate, particularly those people sitting in the car parks. Yeah? So what about the way we communicate? Which is different to the way we behave, and it's different to the way we practice. It's the way we communicate with each other. So if there is poor flow of information, critical information from one party to another, that then will have an impact, won't it, on what they think or what their attitudes of the school are. Can you think of anything else that we can tie into that? Nick?
Does feeling come into it? Does that have behaviours?
A feeling? The way it feels? Yeah, so these behaviours, again, the behaviours, the practices will influence the way we feel about it. Yep. So it's definitely related. I think we can probably talk about one more thing, and that is actually the way people relate with each other. So again, if I just use the restaurant for a moment, what we love about this little restaurant is that the owner of the restaurant comes and sits at the table with you and has a bit of a chin wag, and will actually pour the wine at the table and have a chat and what have you. You actually have to watch your own glass because he's that good. But at the end of the day, what we're experiencing is the way not only he's relating with us, but also relating with others, the other staff in the restaurant. And we feel entirely at ease and comfortable about it. So constantly we buy into that again. That shapes the way what we value about a restaurant, what we believe to be right and wrong about this restaurant, but also our attitudes towards it. Does that make sense? So, we had an interesting conversation the last time I worked with the Junior Heads program with Nairi Tagni's program about a month ago when we were talking about this, and there was a few conundrums that came up around this. It was around the conundrums around what drives this within an organisation. Okay, so we've talked about some of them already. Philip's raised some, and I believe Jason may have pointed one out. But what actually drives what we do here? If this is essentially the outputs of a culture, what are the inputs that actually influence a culture? So what we believe, as an example. Let's start with that one. So if I believe something that's somewhat different to, say, what Philip believes, is that going to be reflected in here somewhere? A difference in the way we do it? It is, isn't it? Yeah. So our beliefs definitely shape our culture. So one of the challenges from a leadership point of view is to align our beliefs within a school or with any organisation. What else can actually shape this here, influence these things here?
Values.
What we value. Thanks, Tim. Yes. So our values, how important it is to have shared values in the context of actually trying to create a united culture.
The way we do things.
That's a good example. So what Johannes is telling me, we have some procedures that actually prescribe the ideal practices within the school. We have prescribed those ideal practices because we believe and we value a certain methodology or a certain output that we want to have in this area here. So we prescribe that based on what we believe and value to be right in the school in that regard. What about attitudes? Our attitudes towards something. Will our shifting attitudes actually influence these? We might have what we believe are the same values and what we understand to be the same beliefs, but I could just come to school with a different attitude. And our attitude is influenced by a whole range of different circumstances that we find ourselves in, but can it not influence this up here? You can have good people that are aligned here, but have a declining attitude, which can almost be a declining commitment in here for whatever reason, but that will influence that out there. So the trick is to create a shared set here and manage that. Because when we can manage that and actually align people to that, then what we do is then get an alignment here in the outputs. So it's working on, do we actually work on the output statements? You know, we think about the values. This is one of the conundrums that we found during the Junior Heads program, was that a lot of people were talking about the 5 or 6 keywords that they had around their values for the school, and they were promulgated on a website somewhere, or in school strategic plans, or in key documentation and those sorts of things. And some of the junior heads are saying, yeah, but we're still having trouble getting that there. So is it that we should be talking about, or is it this we should be talking about more often? Should we be talking about what we believe to be right and wrong, and what we value, and why we value it, and what drives our attitudes? Or are we talking about faith and justice and integrity and those sorts of things? Because what happens when you put one word down? They do. So who here values integrity in their own personal life? Absolutely. So what does integrity mean? And now we'll find out just how differently we think about integrity. So Nick, what does integrity mean to you? No pressure. I'm the one with the camera on. Pardon me? You're of your word. Okay, meaning that I'm walking the talk. What is I'm saying, I'm actually practicing. Yes, I like that. What else would you say is about integrity? Doing the right thing when no one else is looking. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so that's doing the right thing even by yourself. Being honest, true to yourself before you're even true to others. In what I understand is what Tim's saying. What else about integrity? So that's what can happen. That's what can happen. We've had an interesting discussion recently about holding up a 7-Eleven store. That, from an integrity point of view, the perpetrator held up the 7-Eleven store because he needed to support his family. He needed to actually have cash so that he could go and buy food for the family. Now, is there a disconnect there from from a social standard point of view, what we value? And see, so what we value at the time changes what we believe about integrity, you see. So the circumstances that you find yourself in, what you believe to be right and wrong, what I believe is right is to feed my family. This is the argument at this church, the group where I was speaking to, the young man was adamant that that's where he'd been pushed to. There's a point of desperation, and that felt, you can imagine how clouded that he'd become. And when honesty came up as a key element of integrity in a discussion that we had, he said, well, I think I have been honest. So what he meant by that was that when someone said to him, did you rob the 7-Eleven? He answered honestly and said, yes, I did.
So he robbed it with integrity.
But the challenge that we have is that we stick with a one-word statement, and when we don't align our social attitudes, and our social standards, we have to talk more about what this means than actually what this means up here, and not just make it a one-word statement. We have to talk about what actually defines integrity in our school, and what defines justice in our school, and what defines faith in our school, and actually put some behavioural descriptors and some practices and those sorts of things behind it, so that we can align to those. Because the more we leave it open for interpretation, as we've just discovered, that people have different interpretations about based on what their attitudes and values and beliefs are at the time. So we've got a good context there, a good foundation that we've laid about what a culture is and what shapes a culture. So if we value recognition as a key part of what we do, then our behaviours and our practices will reflect that, won't they? As a leader, if we value recognition and actually understand that it feeds the heart and the soul of a person, then then we will apply that. And one of the great ways to moderate a discussion with your teams around this is how will we experience the collaboration? What are the types of things that we'd like to see, like to feel, and like to and to experience overall around collaboration, and get the statements around those clarified, so that we can start to really narrow the focus on what collaboration really is or means for us in that regard. So really being able to bring that to a common understanding. Does that make sense?
Steve, you should have
John.
vision in your green box. Is that based
Vision?
on vision? Was that based on the
I'd say vision is we value our vision and we believe that we can achieve our vision. Would that then shape our behaviours and practices? Well, I'm trying to keep this as simple and as narrow as possible for the moment, but I guess if I believe in the vision and I value the vision, that will actually shape the way I practice and behave and relate and communicate up here with others. But if I didn't, then that would fundamentally change what I would do up here. So if we kind of just hold on to these anchors for the moment and say, well, this is what I believe, this is what I value, and that's reflected in all things that we do. You know, that's reflected in our purpose or our mission statement. It's actually reflected in our values. I value our values in that regard. So is everybody okay with that so far? Philip?
It's also about, accountability from the inside coming out, and not only what you reward and what you value, but what you're also not prepared to put up with.
Have you read my playbook? Moving on nicely. Thanks, a lovely segue from Philip. You're right, absolutely right. It is what you're prepared to do. We'll actually then define that. So we're going to move to that area now. If I was to draw a little seesaw, imagine that we've got a balance beam that's actually teetering on a bit of a pyramid here, and at the end of the day, what we're doing is, as a leader, is having to walk along this seesaw. At one end of the seesaw, we've got the need to manage performance. And this is about what we're willing to accept. Okay, but over the other end of the seesaw over here, what we want to do is manage our relationships with people. Because those practices, those behaviours, those communication traits, those relationships are all human things, aren't they? And they'll all be reflected in the people. So herein lies the dilemma for us as leaders, is that the culture that we set is the balance we create between managing performance and managing relationships. Now, I've worked in some schools recently where there's been some legacy issues from the leadership within the school where the emphasis has been heavily on this. And there's been such an alliance formed with the principal around that any attempt to try and come over here by the new principal has just been met with resistance, and so therein lies the loss of balance in that process. So imagine here you are in here having to actually make sure we know we can't lead unless we bring people along with us, unless you're Jason, of course. But we also know that we've got a responsibility to certain outcomes and results within the school, and there's certain standards, and there's behavioural standards and practice standards, and there's standards in the way we communicate with each other, and standards in the way that we actually relate with each other and socialise and what have you. But at the end of the day, that we've got to walk this balance beam. So some days you might actually find that over here I need to put some time into the relationships, and then there's a time where I've got to walk back across here and actually now put some effort into performance and to manage performance, whether that's through performance management. Does that make sense on that one? So therein lies the dilemma. So there is no such thing as a perfect culture. There is no such thing. If you there's many books out there that will actually talk about how to actually create a culture, but at the end of the day, it's about what you're doing in here to actually manage this, so that hopefully the better you get your culture is the less that you actually have to move along here. If you're having to swing all the way over into here and then swing all the way over into here, then that's hard work. That's really hard work. So the object is to try and get a little movement in there at times. But there is an argument out there that as leaders, one of the things that sorry, not an argument, but it's a dilemma that leaders find themselves in, is they themselves are judged, we are, or as leaders, judged by others all the time. You're on stage 24/7. We just are. So when we're being judged, we're also being judged on what we value the most. Do we value relationships more than we value performance? Or do we value performance more than we value relationships? And if you are someone that is over here and you're seen to value this over here, this then may cause an issue when you need to actually do something over here, and vice versa. So what I was going to do now is actually set up an activity where we're going to have the great debate. And I'm going to split you into two, and one team is actually going to argue for performance and why performance is critical to developing a high-performing culture. And the other team is going to say, well, that's all very well, team performance, but over here in team relationships, you try getting your performance without getting good relationships on board. So what we're going to do is actually now set up a debate internally. Have a bit of fun with this, all right? And by all means, use your theatrical skills and dig deep, and certainly put on a show. We've got the cameras here, so we should do that. But at the end of the day, what we want to do, we're going to learn from each other and actually say, well, if we focused on performance, what are all the things we're going to do over here, and why is that important? And on relationships, why that's actually important. But what we're going to do is actually have a debate. So you'll have an initial opening statement for 2 minutes. Both teams will have that around why relationships are more important or performance is more important. Then you'll have the chance to have your rebuttal against the other team, and then once you've heard those, you'll get a closing statement. So there'll be 2 minutes each, and you'll have 15 minutes in your teams to prepare your case. Okay? Sorry, is that too long? 10 minutes? Would be okay? No? All right? So I've got some. Okay, so to open the argument around driving a high-performance team culture, for the relationship team, please welcome David. Make him feel welcome to the stage.
I'm talking on behalf of the relationships team as to why relationships are far, far more important than just focusing on performance. One of the things about relationships is you're less likely to be losing people along the way because you're building those relationships there. You're more likely to be gaining respect, trust, honesty-based upon healthy relationships, and that can't be performance managed. There's also collaboration. There's more likely to be collaboration when you're dealing with people that you've built relationships with. There's a shared language and focused on improvement. There's feedback for each other, something you don't get with just focusing solely on performance. The social cohesion that is built up is needed to go through the good times and the bad times. The expertise without relationship is empty. For example, the New York Yankees, they've got a massive budget of millions per year focused on individual performance, and they should be winning each year. That is not the case. With one of the things with performance is if you just focus on that, you lose the accountability. Whereas with relationships, people will do anything for you with good relationships. So you're going to get the performance anyway. So you build that relationship and you will get the performance. You concentrate on performance and it'll just fall flat. You won't have it without the relationships. Self-interest with just focusing on performance will become much more important. Whereas with the relationships, you get a team focus, and that will be for the benefit of everybody and especially the organisation. Thank you.
On the question of performance versus relationships, the answer is obvious. Parents are paying for results, not warm fuzzies. While I do not like to disagree with my colleagues, I do have to disagree on some points the first speaker made. Firstly, that respect comes from relationships. I would argue that no, respect does not come from relationships. Respect comes from doing your job well. Secondly, performance doesn't involve feedback. Surely that's the key part of performance management. Also, we're not the New York Yankees. We don't have millions of dollars to spend on making ourselves feel better about losing. We have one shot. Building relationships results in navel-gazing. The hippie movement died a lazy death and proved that there's more important things than feelings. Performance is measurable, while relationships are fickle. Teachers are professionals. They are expected to operate at a professional standard. They are paid to do their job, not to receive a free counselling service. Relationships need to be established at the home. At school, we need to perform. Parents are not paying for their children to find out that what they want to do with their life is sit on their lounge and feel good about themselves. They are paying for their children to receive an education, to go on to university and become successful adults. The self-esteem movement based on relationships was an abject failure. We've all seen this in our school environments, but it's time to make a change. We need to move towards performance management rather than the warm and fuzzies. Thank you.
So the first of the rebuttals now. I'll just give you a quick minute to confer at your tables and have a quick talk about what the other opposing teams have just said to fine-tune your rebuttals, and then we'll kick off with relationships again.
Thank you. We were quite disappointed in the opening speaker from the opposition over here, given the fact that they couldn't really define performance. So in our rebuttal, we'll actually define performance for you. Our definition of performance, which was done on a relationship basis, isn't that we just want people to perform. We want them to perform at the ultimate level in a sustained way. And to be able to do that, the basis of that is to actually have good relationships around trust, around respect, around honesty, on all of our key values that will drive that going forward. Paul Keating had a really interesting saying: if self-interest was a horse, you'd back it every time because it tries harder. Our definition of performance and of sustained performance, if we have that relationship, you build that self-interest into the organisation that you're going to do, and it's going to try much harder, and you're going to get a better result. We also are really disappointed in the fact that one of the most about the hippie learning culture that is apparently occurring that's based upon relationships. Our understanding is that the best type of learning that we want our kids to receive is a holistic one. We don't want one based on figures or on facts, but we want them really well prepared for the 21st century life. Part of preparing them for the 21st century life is to counter some of the individualism that's out there. So we want our students to be able to collaborate. We want them to be able to develop relationships with other people rather than online or on Twitter. And we want our staff within our schools who are operating with each other to be able to model that for our students and to provide them not only with what it looks like, but strategies to develop it. And to have that within the school is worthwhile. So we're not saying performance isn't important, we're saying optimal performance is really, really important, and the way to achieve that is through solid relationships.
Once again, we too were saddened by our learned colleague here, first who got up and needed to talk about sports teams from the US. I guess when you've got all that time to sit around talking and having counselling sessions together, you have time to watch the sports. We're busy trying to actualise the vision of our school to provide performance and outcomes for our students' future. I think that focusing on a sports team and then his counselling member, I guess they have sessions weekly together, also talk about horse racing, and I think that that's a little bit of a Waterhouse deal there. I think that when they get together and have these meetings on relationships, for the sake of relationships, it certainly ends up in a lot of pontificating, navel-gazing, self-directed, self-indulgent, that when you turn back to an organisational focus can end up in gutter sniping and factions. I guess too, when there's not clearly defined policies and guidelines and professional practice in place, then people are going to share their failures. And they will need counselling sessions for that, numerous counselling sessions daily, in the staff room, having a competition about who's having the worst class, the worst day. So I feel for our counselling service schools, and I want to promote performance-based management schools, where we provide a framework, and I must say, I did feel sorry for our second speaker there, trying to rebuttal a classic example of poor performance. I felt sorry that he needed to define or have some description of what performance actually is, and I suggested he just talks to any business in his neighbourhood that is not bankrupt. Policy and framework and structures are going to provide an opportunity to celebrate success together and healthy relationships.
Thank you very much. We did enjoy all arguments presented so far, and we would like to present our closing argument. I'm going to be speaking on two main points. One is the sustainability of our efforts as a school to develop hard facts and hard results for our students and for our staff. That sustainability can only occur when we've got strong team cohesion. We need to be working together, and that cohesion can only develop through good relationships. Also, in order to maintain the efforts that we are putting in, we need to align everyone in our teams with the school's vision and mission. And we can only get that alignment through conversations that are occurring through relationships. We also want to maintain the sustainability through not losing talent due to focusing on individual performance rather than team performance. And finally, we want to focus as a team on the collective capacity of our school rather than focusing through a strong performance-based approach on the individual capacity of staff members. Finally, I would like to talk about the definition of success. For us, success starts with what do our parents want for their children. Do they really only care about OP scores and hard facts that you've mentioned? We believe that parents want their children to be able to work in the workforce of the future. We believe that those skills that they will learn now and that will still be important in 20 years' time will be the soft skills about honesty, about respect, these skills will be the only skills that will still last and be valid in that time. And finally, driving high performance culture is only possible through working with people, because people don't care what you know until they know that you care for them.
Thank you. I've been given the task of summarising our side, which is about performance. I have never debated myself, but I feel very confident in the fact that I have the ability to do so, and I did not need my team sending me any warm fuzzies and building up my self-esteem by telling me that I could do it. Ladies and gentlemen, perform or perish. As principals, that is what we believe that we have been using as our benchmark. As young teachers, we are told not to build relationships with our students until they know what we stand for. And of course, what we stand for is their performance. And as principals, we also are under the watchful eye of our staff, and they want us to perform, they want us to lead, they want us to know what the benchmarks for them are, and as a result of that, we will build relationships with them. Ladies and gentlemen, the courts and the jails are full of people who have been raised in a warm and fuzzy environment. But those that are not walking the streets at night, they are home, they are performance-based people, and as a result of that, I can only draw a parallel with you fine people. I'm sure that at school you performed and you weren't just raised in a warm and fuzzy environment. Can I just close by saying that we will be judged on our performance to win this debate, and to win the debate we must perform. We did not try and build a relationship with the adjudicator, and we are convinced that the relationship that could have been built with the adjudicator would come to nothing. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll just let Robin complete her notes, and then we'll ask Robin to come up and actually talk us through that.
We'll just say the views of the speaker.
Okay. Would you like Robin to use the microphone? Yep. Okay.
Well, firstly, I've got to congratulate both teams on doing this so well in such a short period of time. However, one team, I think, just slightly edged out the other team. And I will come to that in a moment. So I'm going to talk about each speaker to begin with. David did the opening for the relationships team, had a lot of really good points. I would have liked to see a few less, David. There were so many points that I couldn't quite pick up with the really strong ones, and what were the 2 or 3 that were really going to win your argument for you. So although they were really good points, I would have liked to hear more argument and a few less points, which just seems a strange thing to say in a debate. But there was so much there. It took me a lot of time to write it all down. On the other side, we had something of the opposite. Really strong opening, really sort of packed a punch, but there were very few arguments. So that's, yeah, so at that stage you were sort of running neck and neck. I would also like to see the definitions of both relationships and performance in the first speaker, and that didn't come up until the second speaker, and that was Philip, and Philip came up with challenged the definition from this side, not necessarily perfectly, but he did challenge the definition. He said that. I can't even read my own writing here. That he had made a couple of very good arguments as well. Particularly, he said that it was relationships that sustained good performance. It wasn't lots of measurement. He said the best type of learning is holistic. It's more than just facts and figures, and we want collaboration, and this is what we get with relationships. So he made some good arguments. I thought that was a good speech. On the second side, for the second team, we had rebuttal over here from Jason. Jason made the argument quite strongly that it was all about warm and fuzzy. It didn't totally convince me that performance is all about, that relationships are all about warm and fuzzy, but there were some really good points made there as well. So we're still feeling fairly close, and then we got to the closing. Johannes, again, I liked your speech, Johannes. I think that you made 3 really good points. You made the speech about sustainability. You made the speech about the team performance. You made the speech about it's all about collective performance and using the soft skills to get the performance from people. And I thought they were really good arguments. So that was a good speech. And then we had Kevin, who had to pull all this out of the bag. Kevin had a great opening. It was a really humorous speech and really interesting. I really enjoyed listening to it. He said you've got to perform or perish. That the jails are full of people raised in warm and fuzzy homesteads. I think it's probably the opposite, actually, that the children are in jail because they haven't got enough love and warm and fuzzy. However, that wasn't the point. It was a very good performance in terms of presentation. I enjoyed it very much. However, in the end, by about this much, I gave the debate to the relationship team.
And thanks to both teams, and thanks for the individual speakers as well. I appreciate that it's short notice. It's a somewhat an intimidating exercise to stand up here and to speak in an ad hoc manner.
What do you want to hear? What will convince me? And the relationship side said it almost immediately.
At the start there, just a bit of feedback. When I split up the groups, was there anybody that went to performance that wanted to go to relationships? Yeah, the 2 girls? And was anybody over here, and we know, that actually want, in relationships, that want to come across to performance? So there is depending on where you are and what circumstance you find yourself in, you can actually come up with a compelling argument for the opposite to what you're thinking.
Let's start with the small school relationships are even more important because you've got small schools functioning.
Yes.
That's it.
Absolutely, it can, because you're a lot closer to the people anyhow, by default, and just by the sheer physicality of the school and the nature of it, you are definitely closer. At the end of the day, as principals, what are you responsible for? Are you responsible for building good relationships? How will your performance be judged as a principal? How well you develop relationships here, or how well you drive the school's performance?
At the end of the day, the reality is performance, but what's going to determine your performance is the relationships as well.
Absolutely, it will be. We know that we simply cannot achieve what we need to achieve as principals without bringing our people along. So we need to nurture the relationships that we have with the people, and the relationships that are even done without us. We need to have those relationships strong and positive, so that we can in fact have them come along with us on the journey to drive the school's performance. At the end of the day, what do you want though? If you had to default to one position What is it you want your staff and your parents and your boards and all those various entities that will judge your performance, what is it that you want them to know about you? Where will you default if you have to? And so there is, and as I said at the start, nobody gets it right. And so don't ever expect to get it right, and accept that it is hard work, but understand that we will need to move from side to side. And when people see your preparedness to move one way or the other, that's when they'll get on there with you and help start balancing the beam for you. It won't be so much hard work with you. But we need to be prepared to go one way or the other. And that's probably the ultimate challenge in leadership. Does that make sense? Well done, everybody. It was really, really good. A good, healthy discussion. There's some very good points that came out. But at the end of the day, developing a school culture is not just your responsibility. It's taking other people along with you, and that driving people to performance, and actually it's knowing that they recognise what defines great performance, and that they can measure and see that they're moving their way towards that. Will just you'll just be making so many deposits into the bank of relationships. And you'll be able to, and every time you need to make a withdrawal over here to put a deposit in here, it's because you've been depositing here previously. So it goes both ways. Okay, that's it. Any questions?